We're trying to defend non-believers from what ends up being the silliness of the language game. So we're going to try to clarify what faith even means, talk about the history and the theories, and then maybe draw a couple conclusions. First of all, what I wanted to say is we're going to differentiate and point out a distinction between simple faith and complex faith. What might be called vulgar faith, what they called in the 18th century simple, basic, common sense intuitions, which were things like the earth is flat, from complex philosophical faith, which is a more examined, defended, hopefully more clear definition. So is faith guessing or not? Because a lot of times I say it's just guessing. So is that what it is or not? That's one of the questions. And I think the truth is, when we look at that distinction between simple and complex, we're going to get a better answer. Faith is simply knowledge of the unknown. We do say that philosophy is about the paradox of the unknown. It's about exploring questions that can't be answered. So faith and some other religious things would fall into that category for the most part, but we're going to try to, clear that up. Faith is an object that transcends natural law. So when we are looking at what's contained in nature and we try to pull a little vision of the noumenal out of that, we might look at faith as a synonym of how we peek into the noumenal, how we look into the unknown. So that's maybe a Kantian version of that. We're going to do three things in the longer video. We're going to ask what is faith, like I just did. We're going to explore the theories, thinkers that talk about them, and incarnations of the concept. And then we're going to draw some conclusions. So what we're trying to do now, me and my alien friends right here, we're trying to move on into theories and discuss thinkers who have talked about philosophical faith. We've already explained that simple faith is really just intuition and guesswork. But philosophical faith is more, or is intended to be more of a deeper analysis of what it means to examine the unknown. And that's probably the most generous thing I can say. One of the first people I was interested in was Karl Jaspers, 1883 to 1969. Guy lived for a long time. And he is a religious existentialist, and I was promised some analysis of faith, and I got none. And so then I moved to Kierkegaard, who I thought couldn't disappoint me. There's no way to do it, because Kierkegaard, with his leap of faith and his discussion of faith as he tried to reinterpret European religion and faith in a philosophical context, wouldn't disappoint me. But again, nothing. I got nothing out of Kierkegaard. So then I turned to Kant, of course, because Kant's the only person I know that will always give you something. And I thought, since Kant pretended to be religious so that he could keep his job, that he might have some interesting things to say about faith. But as far as I can tell, Kant believed that faith is bound with moral law, which means in Kant's noumenal, the unknown world, the world to which we don't have access, the notion of free will, which was really Kant's biggest concern, had to have some element of faith in God in the noumenal that we couldn't see in order to provide the right amount of freedom, or the sufficient amount of freedom, so that we could say, in fact, we have freedom, which to me has always been one of Kant's weakest arguments. It means nothing. And so that process, or the deduction, would reveal some process of faith, which is a contradiction, because it's either faith or it's a deduction. So I got nothing out of Kant. So I'm going to have to look elsewhere. Me and my alien friends here are going to have to segue into maybe a more traditional analysis of first principles. I guess I can try again. So we've delineated faith into simple faith and complex faith. Simple faith is just kind of guesswork. We've tried to find a philosophical, deeper analysis of faith, and I thought it was going to be easy to find that, and we found nothing. So in philosophy, we do have this problem that ultimately things devolve into some kind of chaos or nothingness, which means, for example, ethics. When we try to find a foundational ethics, something that determines all ethics, some kind of tool that we can use to always have at our disposal to find out what's right or wrong, we end up not being able to find it. And Hume, who was the skeptic, says, ethics is merely just subjective. It's merely just an emotional reaction, and there is no foundational element. There is no source of objective ethics that we can look to and say, this is what is the ultimate arbiter of an ethical decision. So God has always taken this place. So for people that don't give this a lot of thought, God has always simply been that thing that takes the place of whatever the first principle is. But they don't really analyze it, or they're not complex about it, and it devolves into a cultural language tool that just starts wars and means nothing. So we're trying to find a philosophical idea that concretizes a first principle. And when we have Aristotle writing about the unmoved mover, that's at least potentially what we have in mind, because the unmoved mover would be that thing that starts everything. And so in philosophy, whenever we discuss that, whether it's Aristotle or all the way up to somebody like Ayn Rand, who discusses ultimate principles in a common sense way, even though she doesn't admit they're common sense, and says it's all, and this is Aristotelian, but it's all about teleology of life and survival. So whatever is best for our survival and whatever is built in for that survival, whatever is natural, which is a naturalistic explanation, ends up being the arbiter for everything philosophical and meaningful, including ethics. We are really trying to just sum this up and justify faith, not simple faith, but complex faith, by trying to justify it in the exploration, the philosophical exploration of the unknown. So I'm going to give you 3 reasons why we shouldn't accept faith currently. 1, philosophers can't even describe it. They try and try and try. And otherwise, smart philosophers like Kant have very little coherent stuff to say about faith. And it's not for lack of needing this justification. It's because it's, like Reid has said in the past, something that doesn't really have the potential for much words or description. And so without that potential, you constantly fail. And I think that's what keeps happening. So this philosophical tradition of not getting the same substance from the term and concept faith that we do from other things is a serious problem. Second reason why faith fails currently is that there is a distinction between simple faith and complex faith, and I think that distinction is glossed over in some sense because of the first reason. But when we try to do a discussion of faith, we really have a hard time distinguishing between these two things, between simple guesswork and intuition and a more complex faith, which really leads us to the third and not very unique reason, which is that when we actually specifically try to defend a God rather than just some unknown concept, we have this automatic regression to simple faith. We cannot include it in the philosophical realm, and we can't have complex ideas about it. So it immediately falls back into a simple, intuitive kind of stopping point. And so if you're going to be in philosophy and you're going to talk about a stopping point, which is really all of philosophy, you're going to have to find a way to structure that discussion and that idea of that stopping point. Whereas for faith and guesswork, if we're just reverting to simple guesswork, we're not even talking about an object. We're talking about proving the lack of an object, which is pure subjectivity. It's in my head. I can't really explain it. I have nothing complicated to say, so I'm going to jump into it. And I think that's where we are with faith. And really my whole little exploration here of these different philosophers is kind of the most telling part of it, is that I didn't get the same kind of insight that you would get with some of these other journeys. So that's the end. Thanks for watching me and my alien friends.